Hello and welcome back to the Google Workspace Update podcast from Strawberry 7. My name is Adam.
And my name is Adam.
We're here every week to bring you the latest updates in the world of Google Workspace. This podcast is available from your regular podcast provider and also in video format on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/strawberry7.
Coming up on the show today,
we have 5 updates for you today, so a bit of a shorter show than we've been used to. And Adam's told me the first couple are little update-lets. So we've got updates to Google Workspace, Admin, Docs, Drive, and finally Admin again. As always, there is a link in the podcast or the video description to the document that we read from. This document contains some more detailed information, relevant links, some lovely pictures, even some moving graphics showing you all of these features in action. So, let's get to it.
On with the show. Right, so first up this week, we have a general workspace little updatelets for everybody. So, including the alt text option in the image options sidebar of Google Docs, Sheets, Slides, and Drawings. So currently, users add alternative text to images in Google Docs, Sheets, Slides, and Drawings by right-clicking on an image and selecting alt text, which then opens a box for them to input the text. Google is making this feature more discoverable by adding it to the image options sidebar. And so you can access the image options sidebar by right-clicking on your image and selecting image options. So then that's actually an additional click to what you would have had to do before, because before you could just right-click and select alt text. However, I only actually realised today, if you just click on your image, there is the option to click on image options from the toolbar along the top.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Adam, and I think probably Google's thinking is that it's if you're in the image options already, this is sort of another... So rather than doing most of the stuff in the image options and then having the alt text, right-clicking and going alt text, I think they're just grouping it together. Very, very small little updatelet, as you say. Not really too much to say about it. I think it's a very good idea to put that in, group it all together. For anybody who does use alternative text, we've talked about this before, and if any listener knows the answer to this, I haven't had a chance to look it up. Does the alt text feature translate to a accessibility feature, i.e. it reads aloud what the alt text is to somebody with a visual impairment, or somebody who has their system set up for a visual impairment? Because remember as well, visual impairments aren't just black or white. It's not just either you're blind or you're not blind. Some people just have difficulty seeing, or colour blindness maybe. So I don't know if there's that feature built in so that their system universally recognises alt text of an image and reads it out.
That's a very interesting point, actually. I believe, and again, I've not tested this, so I don't actually know. If anyone does have actually know the answer, then that would be very interesting to hear. But what I believe would happen is, say, if you used the alt text on an image as an image description, and then you have the page reader. If it then comes across an image, it will then describe the image based on the alt text that you have inputted to say this is what this image is.
Yeah, I think that's probably an option, at least, as well. And I think it is dependent on the screen reader. I remember the term. It is dependent on the screen reader as to that. But if there's any listeners out there who know the answer to that, any listeners with a visual impairment who use that type of software, or any listeners who have that within their business or have experience of that, please do let us know if the alt text feature is something that does read aloud. Always lovely to hear from our listeners. Thank you, Adam. Very brief update there, but quite interesting, and I think that's a good move by Google. What have we got next, please?
So up next, we have another little admin update. I say update, it's more of a reminder, really, that delegators must reapprove contacts delegates by August 2023, and August 2023 is not very far away at all. So, back in May, Google announced that delegated users can manage contact labels on behalf of their delegator via contacts.google.com. As part of this update, delegators need to review existing delegates as well as add new delegates. This must be completed by July 31st. Or delegates will lose access to manage contacts. Admins can also make these adjustments for users in their domain using the Admin SDK API to remove and re-add the contact's delegate privilege. You can also learn more about managing contact labels with a link that I've added into our document, and that document will be in the link of the description of this podcast.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Adam. Well, yeah, like you say, a very small thing that's more of a reminder. Apologies for any listeners that this affects by the 31st of July. I think that's probably when this podcast is going to go out, or maybe the day after.
Yes, due to be released on the 31st. So if this is something that will affect you, drop everything that you're doing and action this today. If you're listening to this podcast after the 31st, then check in anyway, and just because there may be some urgent action required.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing is, to sort of put people's minds at ease here, it does say delegates will lose access to managed contacts. I don't think there's going to be any deleted data necessarily. It's just going to be that you might have to re-add people in or something like that. Apologies for it being a bit short notice, as it were, to everybody. We obviously go on whatever Google's putting out on their app update cycle, and just to sort of support Google a little bit here as well, Google release these throughout the week, and we record the podcast once a week, so they may have released this quite early on, possibly even the trail end of last week, because we usually record on a Friday.
I think this one came out on Saturday, because it's a little update alert. Then I usually get the update alerts on a Saturday morning, which is the day after we've recorded the previous week's episode. And but still, it wasn't a huge amount of notice, but this was more of a reminder. The actual notice was back in May. I'm pretty sure we would have covered it on this podcast back in May, so then hopefully for anybody that did need to take action, then they would have already been aware of this.
Are you very diplomatically telling any of our listeners off who haven't taken action, Adam? No, we'd never dream of telling any of our lovely listeners off. We love you all. Lovely, thank you, Adam. That's going to be very useful for anybody knowing about that. And like you say, Adam's advice: drop everything and check it if you're listening on the 31st. Thank you, Adam. What have we got next, please? We're getting into the actual updates now, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so we had the two little update alerts, and then this is a more meatier update, you could say, but it's more of a docky update, actually. So this update is for Google Docs. So adding line numbers is now an option in Google Docs. So in addition to previous updates that gives you more control over formatting in Google Docs, such as viewing non-printing characters and enhancements to content organization, Google is introducing the option to display line numbers within Docs that are set to paged mode, not pageless. So that's a little bit discriminative towards anyone using a pageless document, just like I am. I'm not sure.
That's what I was going to say, Adam. It's discriminating you. That's what it's doing.
But yeah, I am a bit curious why this update is only for paged documents, but maybe
it's a bit weird, isn't it?
I'm sure there's a very justifiable reason for that. The page numbers are automatically calculated next to each line in the document and can be configurable for the entire document, a page, or a specific section. Additionally, the numbers are preserved when printing, so that could be very handy, actually. This feature makes it easier for you to reference specific content positions in documents, particularly when collaborating with others on long or complex context. So then I think that content, even not complex context, I think this could be very helpful for within a couple of situations, really, whether it's if you're discussing a contract or something, although you may have various like appendixes and things within your contract anyway, but over to education in your English lesson or something. If you're reviewing some text or a paragraph or something, then it's just a very clear way to highlight specifically which line you're referring to if you're having a discussion or conversation about something that's going on.
Yeah, I completely agree. And collaborating as well, if you're on Google Meet or something like that and you're working on a document. We've done it before where we've been working on a document and I've said, oh, what about this section? And you've gone, what section? Where are you? And I'm trying to sort of highlight to show you on the interactive part where it shows where the cursor is. So having the line numbers is really, really useful. Just to sort of follow on from this, because as we've discussed many times before, Google is definitely listening and hanging on our every word on this podcast. Just to sort of expand on this a little bit, it would be very nice in Google Docs if we saw a little bit more of a status bar it's something that I really miss from Microsoft Word. And what I mean by that is in Microsoft Word there used to be, or there is, this sort of bar that sits at the bottom of the document, kind of where the ruler guides are. Now I know that Google and Apple have a very different sort of stylized outlook to Microsoft, where Microsoft will put quite a lot of information in and it can look quite cluttered, and Google and Apple like to make things a lot cleaner. I do realise that. But that status bar is so handy because it shows you what page you're on, what your total page count is, what your total word count is. You know, it's just those quick glance things. And I know you can get access to some of that stuff, but there's certain things that are quite surprisingly difficult to find. Like, for example, what page you're on. There's not really like a super easy way of determining what page you're on if you haven't got page numbers in the footer of your document or something like that. And I've actually gotten to the point where I've put page numbers in the footer of my document just while I'm working on it, just so that I can get an idea of where I am.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. I haven't actually personally had issues with that because as soon as you start scrolling, then your page number will just pop up on screen. But you wouldn't want to have to do that every 30 seconds, or sometimes it's handy just to glance and just see the answer instead of having to take any action, no matter how big or small. Sometimes it is good to just have the information directly in front of you.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And that scrolling is fine until you're quite zoomed out, and then it's quite difficult when you're scrolling because it's kind of changing.
Or if you're on your phone or on a different device. Yeah. I've not even tried that on my phone, but I imagine that's probably not quite as clear or as easy to do than on my computer, and I wouldn't want to accidentally scroll all the way to the bottom of the document just to see how many pages there were in total or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's another thing, like the total pages, right? It's quite difficult to see. Like I say, I've kind of put it in the footer temporarily while I've been working on documents just to be able to navigate around them. But look, I don't want to go too off-piste from this update. I think this is great. I think this page number, this line number thing is fantastic. Very, very helpful. And interesting that it comes out when printing as well. That's a very interesting thing. Would be quite nice if there was, maybe we'll have this as a little update in the future. It would be quite nice if there was a way of, when you go to print, you could just say, don't print it. So you're not having to kind of completely turn them off and then print and then turn them back on. You can kind of just
they're more for your reference instead of for anybody else's if you then print.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the way I would do it, just not trying to influence you Google developers or anything.
But not like you at all.
I know, right? Not like me to offer an opinion. Never. The way I would do it is I would have it so that when you have the feature and you say show line numbers, there's like a tick box next to that says print line numbers or something like that. So you're kind of doing it on the document rather than having to do it either every time you print, where you're turning the line numbers off completely and then back on, or every time you print saying do or don't print them. I would just have it as a document setup setting rather than a sort of a print or individual setting. That's just the way that I would do it. But this update, lovely. I think this is really, really nice. Very, very good. And you've got some guides here as to how people can do this, right, Adam?
Yes, that's right. So for the admins, there is no admin control for this feature, but for the end users, so after adding content into your Google Doc, select Tools, then go to Line Numbers and select Show Line Numbers. From there you can modify the line numbering mode and determine what portion of the doc you want numbers to be applied to.
Very nice.
But only if you're on paged mode, not for those with pageless.
Bad news for you, Adam. Yeah, that is weird that you can't do it in pageless. I agree with you. It's a little bit odd that you can't do that. Yeah, I think that's a very nice way of accessing it, and it's very nice that you've got those options there that you sort of alluded to in the update earlier about determining the position and things like that. Very nice update. When can people expect to be able to use it, and who's it going to be available for, please?
Okay, so rapid release, there is a gradual rollout, so potentially up to 15 days for feature visibility, which started on July the 24th. Scheduled release, there is also a gradual rollout, which is starting on August the 7th, and this update is going to be available to all Google Workspace customers, as well as users with a personal Google account.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic. Right across the board. That's really, really nice to see. We're recording on the 27th at the moment, a little bit earlier than normal, and I've just checked. We're on rapid release, but I can't see the option on our Google Docs at the moment for line numbers, so we must be in that rollout phase, like you say, the 15 days there from July 24th.
Is that this document that you're looking at?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Which is set up in Pageless.
Oh, that's right. Oh, so this is interesting, right? So when you're in Pageless, do you not see the option at all, or is it greyed out? That's interesting, interesting sort of thing. Adam's going to rapidly make a document that's not in Pageless so that he can test that. Whilst he's doing that, I just wanted to say that July 24th for rapid release, we're going to be well into that when this podcast launches, and August 7th for scheduled release. Anybody on scheduled release domains is not going to have too long to wait for that on August 7th. So that's great news and right across the board. So you're going to see that everywhere in every version. Very, very nice to see. Do you have an answer for us, Adam?
Can't see it just yet, so yet to be determined.
Yet to be determined. Adam's very, very bitter about the pageless thing. So Google, if you're listening, love to see an update where that's added to Pageless.
I'm secretly hoping that was a typo and it is actually just available to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. It was available to every version, but they've just left out people who choose to use Pageless, which is a feature that Google created, right? So they should have done it the other way around. It should have been Pageless first.
Penalised for using their own features.
I know. And in some ways, it kind of makes more sense for it to be on Pageless, because then you can't even say...
It'd be more helpful because you can't just... Well, you don't really reference by which page number you're on anyway.
Because there aren't any pages, right? So you can't even say, page 4, go to page 4 and then look at where my cursor is. You have to just say halfway down the document or something like that. I'm sure we'll see an update where they add that to Pageless format, Adam. Hold out hope. Thank you very much, Adam. What have we got next, please?
So up next we have a Google Drive update. So import sensitive external files to Google Drive with client-side encryption using the Drive API is now launching in beta. So for select Google Workspace editions, admins can import sensitive encrypted files from third-party storage using client-side encryption and the Google Drive API, preserving the confidentiality of your data. Eligible admins can apply for the beta access using a form, and I've added a link to that form within our document for anybody that is interested in applying for the beta. Currently, client-side encryption allows additional encryption by end users within Google Workspace. However, Google knows it's critical for customers and partners to import sensitive content into Google Drive on behalf of their users. With the launch of this beta functionality, admins will be able to easily bulk import files and keep them private with client-side encryption. Google Workspace already uses the latest cryptographic standards to encrypt all data at rest and in transit between facilities. Client-side encryption helps strengthen the confidentiality of your data while helping to address a broad range of data sovereignty and compliance needs. Client-side encryption is already available for Google Drive, Google Docs, Sheets, Slides, Google Meet, Google Calendar, and Gmail. And if anybody would like some additional information, you could see the original announcement, which I have also added a link to.
Fantastic, Adam. Thank you very much for adding those links in for everybody. I don't want to go over client-side encryption too much because we've talked about it so many times on the podcast, but I am aware we're getting new listeners all the time. The client-side encryption, as it says there, Google's data is encrypted anyway. So you've got encryption there. This is for you to be able to add in your own encryption system, your own encryption certificate, as it were, your own encryption layer, so that even Google... It's not Google's encryption system. It's not that Google have or don't have access to your data. It's just that it's your encryption, it's your key, it's your system, so you're in complete control of it. It's encrypted to everybody except you, basically, with clients.
For your own peace of mind.
Yeah, for your own peace of mind, for your own compliance as well. You know, we talked before about I think in America, there's a lot of compliance restrictions, especially when you're working with government and things like that, or if you're working even more so with defence, they'll say you've got to encrypt to this certain standard or this certain layer, or you've got to use this particular protocol, so it gives people that option. This is fantastic because this is a really nice update for admins who are handling that data, and as it says here, rather than the admins having to, I'm guessing from what they're saying here, rather than the admins having to have the key, essentially, or de-encrypt the data to transfer it, instead, the API is going to allow admins to keep it all encrypted on the client's encryption system and transfer it from one place to another without it having to be de-encrypted or the admin having to have the key to unlock it effectively. That key goes into the API and it's never in the admin's control. Now this, I can imagine, would be super, super useful if you're in a situation like, for example, a defense client, okay? So let's say you're in a scenario where you're an admin and you're wanting to do a task. So I'm not talking about an in-house admin, maybe a third-party admin. And you're wanting to perform a particular task where you're moving data and you're doing it for a client who has a defence client as a contractor, kind of an intermediary or something like that, or maybe even the defence client directly. You may have to go through umpteen security checks and security hoops and do things as a company to be compliant to de-encrypt that data in order to act on it or move it or do anything like that. With this update, you're potentially going to be able to, if I've understood it correctly, you're potentially going to be able to just say, hey, I don't need to do any of that because we're never de-encrypting the data. The data is always remaining completely encrypted. It's always remaining safe. Therefore, we're not going to have to comply with those checks because we're never accessing the data itself. We're just moving it from one place to another.
That's a really interesting angle, actually. I was thinking along similar kind of lines, but I was thinking the amount of time that this could save somebody, because if you're having to work on each file individually, de-encrypting them, moving it around, then re-encrypting them again, potentially if there's tens, hundreds, maybe thousands of files, maybe more, that you would need to work on. If you can use the Google Drive API to do all that for you, whilst retaining the encryption, then that could just save you so many man hours, and it would just save so much time.
I think you're right as well. I think that's another good point. I think you're correct as well. Like I say, if we've understood this update correctly, which I think we have from Google's description here. So I think for anybody in that situation who's working with those more specialist clients, again, if you are one of those MSPs or admins who are listening who do work in that sensitive sort of data area, love to hear from you. Love to hear, drop a comment in the video, drop a comment on the podcast or review or however you do it on podcasts, and let us know. Obviously, you don't need to go into any details, but let us know about some of the challenges that you've maybe faced with handling some of that sensitive data, or some of the contracts that you've not been able to pursue because you've not been able to meet the compliance requirements. It might be that a defence client says, well, you've got to have $100 million of public liability insurance or indemnity insurance or something like that. It can be extremely expensive for a small business to bear that cost, especially when you contact the insurance company and the insurance company says, why do you need $100 million of protection, of indemnity cover?
Well, that's confidential.
Yeah, that's confidential. Yeah. I'm moving some files for the Department of Defence, or I'm moving the entire, Trident missile sequence, or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? It's like they're just going to go, oh my god, yeah, well the premium's about £1 zillion a year. So it can be a really high cost for the business to bear with that sort of thing. This update could potentially make that go away. So anybody who's in that field, really, really interested to hear from you. Could you give us a bit of information about how people get started with this, please, Anna?
Sure. So for the admins out there, eligible Workspace customers, and we'll come on to that in just a moment, eligible Workspace customers can sign up to the beta using a form, and I've added a link to the form within our document you can find in the description of this podcast for everybody to sign up to the beta for those eligible workspaces. Once accepted into the beta, you'll receive detailed instructions instructions on how to use the Drive API to import documents with client-side encryption. You could also visit Google's Help Center to learn more about using client-side encryption. And again, I've added a link into our document for that. For the end users, there is no end user action required. Although I kind of put this under Google Drive, this is more of this is for the admins.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. That makes perfect sense as to how people can access that beta using that form. And thank you for putting that link in there, Adam. What's the rollout pace and availability here? A bit of an interesting rollout pace, right? Because it's a beta.
Yes, so Google will be accepting beta applications and allow listing customers over the next several weeks. So that's a little bit ambiguous, but not too much. Hopefully, it shouldn't be too long. If you apply now, then maybe within a few weeks, you should hopefully receive some response one way or another to let you know. So, and this update is going to be available to Google Workspace Enterprise Plus, Education Standard, and Education Plus customers. So it's quite specific as to which tiers will be eligible to then apply for the beta.
Yeah, it's right at the top end. And again, very nice to see that Google are including a little bit more in the education sphere. So it's not just Education Plus, it's Education Standard. But it's not even Enterprise, it's Enterprise Plus. So right at the top end for business, but a little bit more expanded for education. Very nice to see Google taking into account that the education customers might need that for their compliance needs. Thank you, Adam. That's very, very useful information. What have we got next, please? I think this is our final update, right?
Yes, that's right. It's another admin update that we have. So it has been quite an admin-y episode today. But
admins rejoice.
I actually find this update quite interesting, actually, and hopefully many others will as well. So you can now sync users and groups from an Azure Active Directory using Directory Sync. So Google Workspace admins can now use Directory Sync to sync users and groups from Azure Active Directory. Directory Sync is an alternative to Google Cloud Directory Sync, which admins can use to synchronize admins and group data with their Google Cloud Directory without the need to manage on-premises hardware and deployments. Directory Sync is available in open beta, which means no beta sign up or registration is required, unlike the previous update where you do have to sign up. You do not have to sign up for this one. You can also read more about the Directory Sync and its features to determine if it best suits your needs, and I've added some links into our document for that as well. Admins can add up to one Azure Directory connection to sync users and groups information to the Google Cloud Directory. On your Microsoft Azure Active Directory side, global administrator privileges are required for using this feature. So this is so that the full user profile, groups, and group memberships can be read through in order to sync the objects into the cloud directory.
Again, very, very nice update here, and this is going to be so useful for people wanting to sync these different systems up and link these different systems. So really nice to see Azure Active Directory support there. I know that Azure Active Directory is just massively used and massively adopted, so very, very good to see the support there. I think that will be super useful for anybody who's in that situation where they're running maybe a dual environment, or they're an education as well. I mean, we've seen it so much in education where they're wanting to run that bit of a hybrid environment. We can't quite pry Windows and Microsoft Office away from their hands. So we've got to kind of retain that in the working environment, but they really like Google. They really like Google Classroom. They really like Google Drive, and they want to use all of that sort of stuff. So very, very nice to see that blended environment there. And thank you for all of those links, as always, that you've added in there, Adam. How do people get started with this, please?
Okay, so for the admins, to use the Directory Sync beta, go to the admin console, then Home, Directory, Directory Sync. And also, no beta sign-up or registration is required. You can delegate the ability to manage Active Directory with the new Directory Sync admin user role. You can also visit Google's Help Center to learn more about using the new Directory Sync. And of course, I've added a link into our document for that. For the end users, though, there is no end user impact because this is for the admins.
Yeah, that's like the other ones that you said. They're very admin heavy this episode, so all admins will be rejoicing. Thank you, Adam. What's the rollout here? I think we're seeing this available pretty much now, aren't we?
So rapid release and scheduled release. So full rollout started on July 26th. So full rollout, then there should be 1 to 3 days for feature visibility. So by the time that this episode airs, then hopefully this should be available to everyone that is eligible. And those eligible lucky few are all Google Workspace customers and Cloud Identity customers as well. So again, right across the board, available to everybody. But because this is more of an admin update, then it is available to everybody that has access to the admin console and Azure Active Directory, of course.
Yeah, we talked about this before, haven't we? Where Google kind of says, "Oh, it's all Google Workspace customers," and you think, "What, personal customers?" But I guess they kind of get out of it a bit by saying Workspace customers, and by Workspace, you therefore have the admin console effectively. I know personal is still kind of lumped under Workspace, but really Workspace is the paid editions. So I think that's probably how they get away with that. But very nice to see this right across the board. I must say I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting it to be business standard and up at the minimum, possibly more towards enterprise. But very nice to see it right across the board. Google obviously feeling very generous with this update. But having said that, for their own interests, it makes a lot of sense because, if you've got customers who are wanting to migrate from Microsoft across to Google, best to make it as easy as possible for them, and doing a directory sync system where the users are all being synced and the groups and everything like that is a great way to get admins on board with being part of that migration process, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Instead of everyone or the different larger companies, so it's kind of typically Apple, Microsoft and Google, instead of them all kind of standing their ground and saying, no, if you want to work with us, you have to do it our way or not at all, then I think that could definitely cause a bit of friction for the users that have kind of dabbled into all areas. Whereas if they all sync up and work nicely together, then they'll probably find that the users are more freeing to actually use the different services from the different areas because they can access them much easier. If they say, oh, I would love to use this platform or whatever, but I can't, because I have to use this account to log in or something like that, or it won't sync with something else, so I'm just going to not use it because I don't want another login to remember. If they all sync up, then they'll probably find that it keeps everyone happy, basically, and customers are probably going to be a lot more likely to use all the different platforms because they have access to them a lot easier.
Yeah, that's right, and it just makes it so much easier for that migration across. If you do want to stick to one particular platform and you're going across from Microsoft to Google, let's say, or you just want to keep with that blended environment, you're right there, Adam, that it does make it easier for them all to sort of sync up and be talking to each other. So very, very nice to see. Lovely updates from Google this week. Very nice to see all of that, and that is it, everybody. That's everything that you need to know about all of the latest updates happening in the world of Google Workspace. Remember that this podcast is available in audio format from your regular podcast provider and also in video format on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/strawberry7. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
We'll be back again next week with more updates.
Goodbye.
Bye!